Welcome to This Explainer. We're jumping straight into the shield of busyness, the psychology of constant activity. Today, we're going to unpack the fascinating psychology of people who are, well, essentially addicted to being busy. You know the type. Honestly, you might even be the type. The person whose calendar is just meticulously packed from dawn till dusk, who gets this literal physical itch of anxiety if they have to sit completely still on a weekend. We're diving into some really compelling source material today that totally flips our understanding of productivity upside down. We're going to uncover why this frantic pace isn't always about ambition, but actually about something much, much deeper. So let's kick things off with a pretty provocative question. Are you simply a highly productive person, or are you using constant activity as a psychological shield? It's a heavy question to ask yourself, right? I mean, we live in a world that practically hands out trophies for burnout. But the research we're analyzing today challenges us to take a really hard look in the mirror. It's asking us to consider if our completely overflowing to-do lists are actually just a clever, totally socially acceptable way of running away. Moving on to the iceberg model, surface versus descent. To really get this, we've got to look at hustle culture like an iceberg. What we actually see in the workplace, or, plastered all over social media and in our daily routines, that's just the tiny, freezing tip jutting out of the water. To truly grasp the psychology of constant activity, we have to take a deep breath and go way below the surface to see the massive, unseen structure that's actually steering the ship. And that brings us to a core thesis from our source material. The surface shows productivity and hard work, but the reality is that it's a shield against painful fears. What society celebrates as relentless hustle is, more often than not, just a mechanism to hide from suppressed emotions. Above the surface, sure, you get praised, you get promotions, people call you a go-getter, and your ego gets this massive boost. But the reality beneath the water is that all this output is functioning as a defensive wall. Basically, the busier your hands and mind are, the less bandwidth you have to process the difficult, painful stuff lurking in the background. Which leads us to the threat of silence. As we sink deeper into the psychology here, we hit a really crucial trigger for the chronically busy, and that's the sheer terror of quiet moments. I mean, why do we dread an unexpectedly empty afternoon? Why do we instantly pull out our phones the literal second we step into an empty elevator? Well, because for someone using busyness as a shield, silence isn't peaceful at all. Silence is an active, terrifying threat. It's the exact moment those defensive walls drop. The text specifically points out that busyness is used for, quote, avoiding the silence where thoughts rise to the surface. And that is exactly why I'm going to pause right now, just so you can feel how incredibly loud that silence can actually be. Okay, did you feel that? Did you feel that sudden, almost automatic urge to check another tab or find some kind of distraction? It's a lot like holding a beach ball underwater. The second you stop actively pushing it down with busy work, it just launches right up into your face. Now, this avoidance doesn't just happen randomly, it builds into a really rigid step-by-step cycle. First, you suppress a painful fear. To keep it down, step 2 kicks in, and you fill the impending silence with frantic activity. But, to justify all this running around, step 3 requires you to tie your self-worth directly to that effort. And finally, step 4, you have to keep the mask on to convince yourself and everyone else that you're just a dedicated hard worker. It is such an exhausting, closed loop. Looking at the core here, the ego and the mask. What's truly fascinating about this is how step 3 brings us to the intersection of your ego and this mask of the hard worker. Because at this point, the hustle isn't just about avoiding a negative feeling anymore. It's actually morphed into the very foundation of the person's identity. The ego absolutely loves the mask. The mask says, hey, I'm important, I'm needed, I am totally in control. But a mask, by definition, is something you wear to cover up your real face. So the source emphasizes this highly dangerous idea of, quote, tying self-worth only to effort. This is a terrifying internal metric to live by. If your worth is only equal to your output, then taking a break isn't just unproductive, it's an active attack on your own self-esteem. It means a relaxing Sunday on the couch feels less like a well-deserved rest and way more like a moral failure. If you aren't sweating, stressing, and striving, you genuinely start to believe you're completely worthless. Which brings up the big question: what happens when the mask comes off? This dependence breeds a very specific paralyzing fear that the source identifies. It's the absolute terror of what happens to your identity if you actually stop working and that mask is finally removed. Like, what happens if you get sick? Or what happens when you retire? If you've spent a solid decade telling yourself that your value comes solely from clearing your inbox and managing projects, the mere thought of that mask slipping is existentially terrifying. Because if you aren't the busy worker, who on earth are you? And if that mask never comes off, we reach the bottom of our iceberg, the ultimate cost. This reveals the incredibly exhausting toll of maintaining this psychological shield. You simply cannot run a human engine in the red forever. You just can't. The sheer amount of psychological energy it takes to simultaneously hold back all those suppressed fears while performing this identity of relentless productivity, it's staggering. Eventually, the entire system is going to break. The source warns that this culminates in something called survival mode. They define it as a state of existence where constant activity becomes a permanent lifestyle to outrun suppressed emotions. So you're taking a temporary stress response and turning it into a lifelong, inescapable reality. Survival mode is biological, right? It's designed to give you a quick burst of adrenaline to outrun a predator. It's actually wild to think about it this way, but the chronically busy have somehow tricked their nervous systems into outrunning their own emotions every single minute of every single day. And they're literally just calling it a career. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final thought about the reality of your own busyness. Right before that silence returns, take a really hard look at your calendar for tomorrow. How much of it is truly necessary, and how much of it is actually armor? If the mask falls off, who are you in the silence? It's a question definitely worth finding the answer to, even if it means you have to sit still to do it.